It won't be too long now, and many of us will be thinking about planting potatoes. So I thought I'd share with you today a little experiment I did last spring comparing potato planting techniques. So I used 4 different planting methods: the kind of traditional trench and hill method, I used a no-dig method, a container planting method, and a straw bale planting method. And I want to share the results of each with you. Now, before I show you the results, I do want to add in one caveat. This was not a perfect experiment because I ended up using a mix of different potato varieties. It was basically what I had on hand. I had Purple Viking, which is one of my long-standing favorites, and then I was able to pick up some just generic white and red seed potato from a local shop. Ideally, I would have had the same variety planted in every situation, but even with the mix of varieties, I felt like the experiment gave me a pretty good look at how each of the different methods would perform. So let's take a look. Now, the first method I used is what I call a traditional planting method for potatoes. It involves digging a trench, placing your cut seed potatoes in the trench, covering them with several inches of soil, and then hilling the plants as they grow. And this method involved the most work in both the planting and the harvest. Now, as my plants grew, I hilled them both with dirt, and towards the end I just started adding straw to the top of the hills to cover the plants as they grew. So when they were ready to be harvested, what I had to do was pull all of that straw back and then dig up the potatoes. And in this planting, I used my generic white seed potatoes. When it came time to harvest, I got about an average yield from most any potato I've grown through the years, and it ended up being about 25 pounds for a 20-foot row. The second technique I decided to try was a no-dig method. So the idea here is that you don't have to prep your ground before planting. You don't dig a trench. I basically took an area of the garden that I had had cover cropped over the winter, cut that cover crop, raked it out of the way, and laid my cut seed potatoes directly on the bare soil. I then covered them with several inches of compost and topsoil, and as the plants grew, I hilled them using straw and grass clippings and chopped leaves and basically whatever I had. Now, this method was incredibly easy, both in the planting and the harvest. And in this area, I used my standby favorite potato, which is Purple Viking. And when it was time to harvest, it was incredibly easy. All I had to do was peel back the layers of straw and grass, and I was basically able just to pick all the spuds off the ground. Now, this method definitely had clear pros and cons. The pros, of course, were that it was very easy to plant and harvest. The cons were that my yields were much lower. I ended up with about 15 pounds of potatoes for a 30-foot row, and this is coming from a variety I know has very high yield potential. The other big problem was that by using all that nice straw and grass clippings, I basically built a little vole hotel so that all the voles on my property thought that they could just hide underneath there all snug and warm and protected and nibble on the delicious potatoes that were easily accessible because they weren't buried deep within the soil. They were just kind of sitting there amongst the straw. So I had a lot of vole feeding damage on some otherwise really nice spuds. I'm not discounting this method. I think that if you are in a hurry just to get some potatoes in the ground, this is a great way to do it. Plus, I think this could work really well to break in new ground for future plantings because you're adding a lot of organic matter and the spuds are kind of working to break up that ground. So if you look at it as kind of a 2-in-1, it might be worth it. The next method I used was a container planting method. So you can see the whole process in detail in the video linked above. But basically the idea is planting spuds in a very large container. I filled a 20-gallon grow tub up about halfway with soil, placed my cut seed potatoes, covered them with a couple inches of compost and soil, and then filled in the grow tub with compost, soil, and grass clippings and mulch as the potatoes grew. Now, my grow tubs, I used a mix of all 3, so I had Purple Vikings, red and white seed potatoes, and I had 3 different tubs planted. And truly, of all the methods, this one is fantastic because it's a very little amount of work for a relatively high yield. So I did harvest some of my potatoes early, so I didn't have the full potential yield when I measured them, but I ended up averaging about 5.5 pounds of potatoes per 20-gallon grow tub. And while I wouldn't necessarily want to do a huge planting this way, I really like this because, as I mentioned, it allows me to get some potatoes in early. My garden soil is often just too wet to get in and work in the spring, and I don't get potatoes in sometimes as early as I'd like. So this gives me a little more flexibility. Plus, harvesting grow tub potatoes is a lot of fun, especially if you have kids, because you just get to dump the whole bucket and dig through it and find the spuds. It's kind of like finding buried treasure. Even as an adult, it's a lot of fun for me as well. And the final method I used was planting potatoes into conditioned straw bales. So this is the first year that I attempted a straw bale garden, and most of my other veggies did really well. This was really, really easy to plant. Basically, I just took some small seed potatoes, made some deep holes into the straw bale, stuffed them in there, added a little compost and soil, and let them go. This was also the easiest method to harvest, because when it was time to harvest, I just stuck my hand down in the straw bales and pulled out tubers. Now, I'm probably lucky that there wasn't some little varmint with sharp teeth in there eating my potatoes when I did this, but I didn't run into any problems. And ironically, I didn't have any vole chewing damage on the potatoes in the straw bales for some reason. Now, for all the ease of planting and harvest, this method was the most disappointing to me. The amount of potatoes I was able to harvest really amounted to nothing. And with the straw bales, they definitely leach out water and nutrients much faster than an in-ground planting. So potatoes being a heavy feeder, you really need to be super diligent about feeding them regularly, and I was not. And that definitely affected my yield. So going forward, I will probably be sticking to my traditional trench and hill method, especially when I have a large amount of potatoes to plant. But I also will be doing container plantings, mainly because I really like that ability to get some potatoes in the ground super early. And if you have a favorite method of planting potatoes that works really well for you, be sure to share it below in the comments. And if you find content like this helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.